Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I am Councillor Mohammed Iqbal, the current Lord Mayor of Leeds. On behalf of Leeds City Council, I would like to welcome you to Leeds Civic Hall and this beautiful banqueting hall. For those of you who haven't been here, what a fantastic venue it is for a very positive movement, which we are looking forward to listen to the lecture of Leeds International Peace Lecture. We are very pleased that the distinguished actor, Chancellor of Huddersfield University and citizen of Yorkshire, Patrick Stewart, has agreed to give the 2007 Leeds International Peace Lecture. Patrick Stewart follows a long line of esteemed speakers for this lecture, including the mayors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Professor Paul Rogers, and the Nobel Peace Laureate John Hume. We are delighted Patrick has been able to make time out of his heavy schedule with the Royal Shakespeare Company to talk about his work on Amnesty International tonight. The Leeds International Peace Lecture is dedicated to the memory of the Swedish Prime Minister and international peace campaigner Olaf Palme, who was assassinated 21 years ago. Olaf Palme was Prime Minister of Sweden in the 1970s and 80s and was a leading figure in the quest for peace between Israelis and Palestinians, and in finding peaceful solution to the Iran-Iraq war, which began in 1980. He chaired the United Nations Palme Commission, an independent commission which looked at disarmament and security issues in the middle of the Cold War. Olaf Palme was also a major leader in the international community campaign that started the process in ending apartheid in South Africa and Namibia. On the 28th February 1986, Olaf Palme was assassinated while leaving a cinema with his wife in Stockholm. His murder has never been solved. This memorial lecture remembers his quest for peace and also his link with the city of Leeds, which he visited as a student politician in the 1950s. These lectures have been undertaken with the cooperation of the Olaf Palme Peace Foundation and the Swedish Embassy. This lecture has been organised by the Leeds City Council Peace Link Group and the Leeds Metropolitan University Praxis Centre. The Peace Link groups includes councillors from all the major political groupings in Leeds City Council and meets quarterly with all the main peace and humanitarian groups in the city. The Praxis Centre is a new multidisciplinary body which has developed undergraduates and postgraduates courses in peace and conflict resolution studies. I am pleased one of the directors of the centre, Professor Dave Webb, is chairing tonight's lecture and will talk more about the centre later. Leeds is a progressive international city in which its diverse communities live together in relative peace and harmony. I have spent much of my political career assisting with this in my ward of City and Hunslet, and as a Lord Mayor have seen many examples of peacemaking and conflict resolution across this wonderful city. Leeds has also welcomed people from across the world, including myself, and benefits greatly from contribution they play in all walks of life. As we celebrate 800 years of Leeds receiving its charter and the 200th anniversary of the abolition of slavery, I am very pleased that Patrick Stewart will be talking about why we should promote human rights in the world today. Whether it is in Zimbabwe or Guantanamo Bay, Burma or Palestine, attacks and threats to human rights remain a daily problem for millions of people in the world. The influx of refugees and asylum seekers into cities like Leeds over recent years, whether Kosovans or Iraqis, Afghans or Congans, reminds us of how fortunate we are to live in stable, peaceful, democratic society. Modern slavery, whether bonded labour or millions of women forced into prostitution, remains as much a problem now as it ever did 200 years ago. Across the political spectrum, we have to educate the younger generation of our society on the impact of wars and repressive regimes on millions of people. We also have to make them aware and become involved in the campaigns for a more just, humane and peaceful world. As we celebrate Leeds this year, I cannot think of a better way to do that by developing in the young people of Leeds, some of whom are here tonight, an understanding of their role as citizens of the world. I was very much looking forward to hearing Patrick's lecture and find out more of what we can all do, but unfortunately I've got another commitment for 8 o'clock, therefore I'd have to leave early. I'm very pleased so many of you are here to listen to tonight's lecture. I hope you have an interesting meeting, and on behalf of Leeds City Council, I thank you for your attendance. Thank you. And on behalf of the citizens of Leeds, I will present a gift to Patrick Stewart.
Hello, everyone. I'm Professor Dave Webb from Leeds Metropolitan University Praxis Centre, and on behalf of the Praxis Centre and the Leeds City Council Peace Link Group, I'd like to welcome you to the 2007 Leeds International Olaf Palme Memorial Peace Lecture. I'd like to thank the Lord Mayor for his opening address. I'd also like to thank all of you for coming and attending in such numbers tonight. Following on from what the Lord Mayor has noted, I would like to emphasise why we are holding this peace lecture in memory of the former Swedish Prime Minister Olaf Palme. Olaf Palme was perhaps one of the most influential European politicians of the 1970s and 1980s and was renowned for his work to create a peaceful world. His main inspirations through his political life were the elimination of colonialism, the right of national self-determination, the need for a new economic world order, the necessity of equal human rights for all, the fight against racism, and the democratisation of education. As a student politician, Olaf Palme visited Leeds as the chairman of the Swedish National Union of Students. He also travelled widely through Africa, Asia, the Middle East and the United States. As Prime Minister of Sweden, he helped maintain the country as a model of economic and social progressiveness. Internationally, he was a respected statesman who was involved in seeking solutions to conflicts around the world. This lecture remembers the need to develop international common security in a peaceful manner and coincides with the 21st anniversary of Olaf Palme's tragic assassination. The Leeds International Olaf Palme Memorial Peace Lecture has taken place in Leeds Civic Hall for a number of years. The standard of the speakers has always been extremely high, and all have been committed to the promotion of peace and human rights in the world. Last year's lecture was presented by the distinguished expert on international terrorism, Professor Paul Rogers of Bradford University, who spoke on the conflict in Iraq and the potential for war in Iran. Previous speakers have included the mayors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Elizabeth Palme, the wife of Olaf Palme, the Nobel Peace Laureate John Hume, and Jude Kelly, the former director of the West Yorkshire Playhouse. Tonight's lecture continues in that rich tradition, and I'm very pleased indeed that Patrick Stewart, the distinguished actor and Chancellor of Huddersfield University, can attend. I'm sure most of you will know who Patrick Stewart is, and a biographical note has been given out to you on your seats. Suffice it to say that Patrick Stewart is one of the foremost British actors of the past 30 years, with considerable and impressive acting credits with the Royal Shakespeare Company, film credits such as the likes of Star Trek, X-Men, Hedda Gabler and Excalibur, and television credits in classics like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, I, Claudius and Moby Dick. He is an Emmy and Golden Globe nominated actor and has won the prestigious Olivier Award for Best Solo Performer. He was also awarded the OBE in 2001 for services to the stage and cinema. Patrick Stewart also has a strong belief in education, and in 2004 was installed as Chancellor of the University of Huddersfield, where he has worked enthusiastically with staff and students alike. In 2007, he was also appointed as the next Cameron Mackintosh Visiting Professor of Contemporary Theatre at St Catherine's College, Oxford, following in the footsteps of the likes of Stephen Sondheim, Sir Ian McKellen and Sir Tim Rice. I'm also particularly pleased to mention that Patrick Stewart received an honorary degree from Leeds Metropolitan University in 2001. The reason we asked Patrick Stewart to present tonight's lecture, though, was for his commitment to the human rights group Amnesty International, of which he has been a key supporter for many years. In particular, he's been involved with two key campaigns: Stop Violence Against Women, which seeks to highlight the suffering, issues and re-education required when dealing with domestic violence, and the Patrick Stewart Human Rights Scholarships. The Human Rights Scholarships and the promotion of human rights lie at the centre of tonight's lecture. Patrick Stewart will talk about them and why he believes it is essential for the younger generations to be involved in these issues. Tonight's lecture is brought to you by the Leeds City Council Peace Link Group and the Leeds Metropolitan University Praxis Centre. As a member of the Praxis Centre and the Peace Link Group, I know how important the study and promotion of peace is in the City of Leeds, whether through the Leeds Together for Peace festivals or the support of the Council for projects like Chernobyl Children's Project and Mayors for Peace. The Praxis Centre is a multidisciplinary centre which has brought peace and conflict resolution studies to Leeds Metropolitan University. Postgraduate research began in 2005 and undergraduate courses began this academic year. And material actually on these courses is available on the table at the back of the hall here. Also, just recently, the Leeds Metropolitan University signed a Memorandum of Understanding with the Peace Museum in Leeds. So we are hoping to host more activities to do with peace in the very near future. The Praxis Centre is currently involved in research areas including the militarisation of space, non-lethal weaponry, human security, human and child rights, the technologies of political control and information warfare. Further details are available on the Leeds Met website. So without further ado, I'd like to call Patrick Stewart to the lectern. Patrick has agreed to talk for about 30 to 40 minutes, and then there'll be some opportunity at the end for questions. So, Patrick Stewart.
Thank you very much. The bad news is that I'm actually talking for longer than 30 to 40 minutes. The good news is that you won't have to listen to me only. There will be another voice. I'd like to welcome you all this evening, and especially welcome those students who are here today, because the heart of much of what I have to say is about you and your contemporaries. So it gives me enormous satisfaction to see so many young people in the audience. Despite all those glamorous-sounding introductions that you've heard, it is only whenever I come back to what I consider home, that is the West Riding of Yorkshire, that I feel inappropriate and somewhat out of place. As some of you in the audience know, I was a secondary modern school boy whose education finished at 15. To me, Leeds meant the Grand Theatre. I came here as a young teenager to have my first taste of West End shows, shows that were either on tour before they went into the West End or had finished their run and were now touring the provinces. And sometimes I would walk around the civic centre here of Leeds and admire and be somewhat in awe of these magnificent buildings. It still feels somewhat unreal that I should find myself in this beautiful room tonight being the keynote speaker at such an event. I don't quite know how any of these things came about. I'm just grateful that they did. One morning in the late 1960s, I was sitting on the tube on my way to rehearsals with the Royal Shakespeare Company, and I glanced at a newspaper over a fellow passenger's shoulder, and my eye was caught by a short piece about an Athens theatre company whose director and actors had been arrested and thrown into jail. No charges had been made, and they'd been allowed no contact with lawyers or family or friends. They'd simply disappeared. It was believed that their arrest, however, was the result of rehearsing a play, and it gave details of the play. It wasn't a modern, cutting-edge, political, anti-government piece of propaganda slander. It was, in fact, a 2,000-year-old comedy by Euripides. Well, when I got to rehearsals, drinking a cup of coffee in the green room, I asked other actors if they had seen this piece and what it was all about. How can they arrest actors for rehearsing an ancient classic play? Surely there could be nothing more innocent, I said. Another actor lowered his newspaper and looked at me pityingly. "You're not innocent if you're living in Greece under the colonels," he said. "If the junta don't like you, you're guilty and silenced." "Colonels?" I said. "Junta?" I had no idea what he was talking about. "Look," he said, "life isn't just about what role you're playing next, getting bigger parts, and hearing applause. If you want to know what's happening in the real world, you should find out about Amnesty International." Well, I don't remember where that actor is today. I don't even remember his name, but I owe him a great debt. I did look up Amnesty. I did become a member, and for over 40 years, my association with that organization has given me more pride and purpose and sense of involvement in the world than anything else. What is Amnesty International? That question doesn't need answering for most of you here, but maybe there are some who don't know. Amnesty International was founded in 1961 by Peter Berenson. It's a global movement of around 2.25 million people campaigning for human rights. It works for a world in which everyone enjoys all the human rights as stated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other international standards. It researches, campaigns, advocates, and agitates to end all abuses of human rights. Amnesty International is independent of any government or political ideology, economic interest, or religion. Its work is largely financed by contributions and from its membership and public donations. Amnesty has activists in more than 80 countries in all regions of the world. In a recent speech, when accepting an award on behalf of Amnesty International from, interestingly enough, the Greek Bar Association, that fact itself a symbol of what can be achieved, the Secretary General of the International Secretariat, Irene Khan, said, "There is today an elaborate system of human rights treaties and declarations which establish a range of rights and obligations from the prohibition of torture and the death penalty to the recognition of the equality of women and the rights of children. At the international and regional level, there are mechanisms and procedures to scrutinize state behavior, treaty bodies and special rapporteurs, the International Criminal Court, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. At the national level, there are constitutional provisions, laws and policies, and national institutions for human rights. Most importantly of all, human rights today are not simply an initiative of states. They are an endeavour of people. The most obvious sign of that is the explosion of human rights NGOs at the international, national and local levels, from small community groups to large organisations like Amnesty. Human rights are increasingly becoming the vocabulary of other movements too. Women's groups captured the human rights agenda at the Vienna World Conference. Development organisations have begun to speak of a human rights-based approach to development. Indigenous peoples, landless peasants, the disabled, all are plotting their own place in the landscape of human rights. Human rights embody common values of human decency, equality, and justice. And as such, these are the basis of our common security. But in the name of security, those values are being attacked and eroded daily. Human rights are based on universal standards and legally binding treaties, but these instruments are often being flouted with impunity today. Following the attacks of the 11th of September 2001, the United States has launched what it calls a war on terror, which is undermining the global values, the global standards, and the global institutions of human rights and international law. Even the absolute prohibition against torture and ill treatment is no longer sacrosanct. The US administration has made efforts to put itself outside the rule of law. The very principles of due process and accountability have been turned on their heads. European governments, including our own, have adopted laws that threaten to erode human rights standards, and they have participated in renditions or returns of prisoners to countries where they can be tortured. The war on terror has weakened the moral authority of the West to speak on human rights. Violence against women is rampant in many countries. But the real war that must be fought is against poverty, which affects billions of people. There must be a paradigm shift of security which places human beings and human rights at the center of the international agenda. There can be no real lasting security without respect for human rights and the rule of law. Well, that's some of the background to Amnesty International and the current issues that occupy it today. But what are ordinary people doing about them? And most importantly for me, what are young people doing about them? Well, I'm going to tell you now what several score of young people in the United States are doing. And this is the heart of my address. In 1997, while I was still resident in the United States, I lived there for 18 years. I never took citizenship. I was technically a resident alien, which was a source of great amusement to lots of people. The then Secretary General of Amnesty International USA, Bill Schultz, took me out to lunch and made a proposition. You want to work for human rights, Bill said, but as a very busy actor and producer, you don't have time to campaign, to travel, to attend meetings. Well, what you can do is by making a reasonably modest amount of money available to give opportunities for young people to become human rights activists. And he proposed that I should fund an annual scholarship, which young people with human rights interests could use to develop their particular concerns in aspects of all human rights throughout the world. Well, exactly the same as when I was asked if I might be interested in, if asked, to be Chancellor of the University of Huddersfield. I knew immediately that my response would be positive. I was excited by this proposal, and right there and then, over lunch, the Patrick Stewart Scholarship for Human Rights was created. The only condition for application was that applicants should be US citizens and in full-time education. This meant that the field would range from high school students, our youngest applicant was 14, to postgraduates studying for their master's degrees. The requirement was that each applicant would have to provide a CV of their human rights experience to date and a detailed description of what their special area of work or investigation should be and how they plan to spend that scholarship, a sum of between $1,500 and $2,000 per person. The scheme was modestly advertised in a number of schools and colleges, but we quickly found that word of mouth was the best advertisement. The first applications came in the winter of 1997. A committee at AI USA headquarters in Washington, D.C. assessed them. I added my thoughts to the final selection, and that summer, 12 students set about their projects. And as an example of the diversity of applicants and projects, I'll just briefly tell you who those first 12 students were. Daniel Anisfield, 25, interned with the African Meeting for the Defense of Human Rights. Paul Barnes, 24, conducted an education campaign through the Children's Legal Defense Fund in Kentucky. Kathleen Caron, 28, interned with the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribal Attorney's Office in South Dakota. Rose Celario, 23, interned with the United Nations Development Fund for Women in Ecuador. Melinda St. Louis, 22, conducted a study of the effects of working in sweatshops on women in El Salvador. Colleen McGinn, 24, interned at the Documentation Center of Cambodia in Phnom Penh. Erica Mott, 23, worked with several community-based programs in linking the arts, education, and human rights. Jeff Redding, 23, interned with the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan in Islamabad and Lahore. Martha Josephine Swan, 30, worked in South Africa with the International Truth and Reconciliation Commission Monitoring Project. Robin Toomey, 21, interned with the California Coalition for Women Prisoners in San Francisco. And Lily Wang, 16, explored perspectives of Chinese citizens towards human rights in the United States. Since 1998, there have been a total of 180 successful applicants. It was apparent from the start that women dominated the applications, and a large percentage of all the applicants were from law schools. They've worked and traveled in many countries on all continents. They've been in cities and remote, often isolated rural areas. Sometimes they have been at risk. Great care is taken to keep our recipients away from peril. In fact, we have turned down some applications because the dangers connected with them were too great. These young people make themselves vulnerable in other ways, though. There are many places where human rights are not thought fashionable or cool, and the risks are not confined to Colombian compounds or Myanmar villages. One teenage student working on death penalty issues in the American South was threatened and verbally abused. For me, the best part of each year were the debriefings of recipients over a long weekend, and it would take place in whatever US city I happened to be working in at the time. Then, for the first time, I came face to face with these young people. I could question them and hear firsthand the accounts of their experiences. And what I've got here now are a dozen or so of those debriefing reports. I'm going to go through some of them and give you an impression in a little more detail of what some of these, who these young people were and what they did. Jeremy Woodrum, 21, Georgetown University. This summer I traveled to Thailand to work with Earth Rights International, a Thai-based non-government organization. One of ERI's missions is to support those struggling for freedom and democracy in Burma. In my capacity as an intern, I developed and taught a course on nonviolence to refugees who had fled Burma. The curriculum I wrote can be retaught by future teachers from ERI. Jeremy Woodrum, by the way, following this experience, went on to serve as the Washington director of the Free Burma Coalition. He continues to work at other organizations, most particularly the US Campaign for Burma, which he co-founded. So he has pursued work on the topic of his project and has been a leader of the movement. Jennifer Kaplan, aged 23, from UC Berkeley. 2 months I spent working with, now my Spanish is not good, but so forgive the pronunciation here, the Agrupación de Familiares de Detenidos Desaparecidos Santiago de Chile, otherwise known gratefully as the AFDD. The 2 months I spent working with AFDD were the most intense of my life. My goals before going to Chile were simply to help AFDD in their fight for truth and justice, to bring Pinochet and other murderers and torturers of the directorship to trial, and to learn from them about grassroots organizing in the face of institutionalized abuse. I feel we achieved these goals. Working mainly under Mireya Garcia, the Secretary General, I was able to perform a service no one has as yet had time to organize, to extract from 1,198 narrative accounts the names, organisms, and other specific information about all of those who participated in the perpetration of all recorded disappearances, and make a coherent database which could be kept on disk and expanded, rather than kept in filing cabinets. Sita Balthazar, aged 24, Kent College of Law. Her topic was sexual violence against women during the Rwandan genocide. She writes, "The Patrick Stewart Scholarship paid for my plane ticket from the US to Rwanda in 1999. I had studied the headlines during the Rwandan genocide, researched the laws that applied to armed conflict in law school, and watched human rights documentaries. But it is the plane ticket that allowed me to add faces to the headlines, touch the wounds of war, and put into practice the human rights standards that I had spent 3 years studying. I spent over a month in Rwanda volunteering with a Rwandan local NGO, which was founded to help women who survived rape during the 1994 Rwandan genocide. The organization provides counseling services, medical services, legal services, and income-generating activities. Many women have AIDS as a result of being raped, and many of them have also children as a result of those rapes. The most rewarding part of my work in Rwanda was to visit the women in their homes or in the hospital to listen to their stories. They were always happy to share their stories and were happy to know that someone still cared about what had happened to them. The women were amazed to find out that I also volunteer as a race crisis advocate in the United States. They were not aware of the fact that women in the United States are also raped. The fact that violence against women is a universal problem strengthened their fight to end violence in Rwanda and made them feel that their battle was part of a global battle to stop violence against women. Salvatore Gogliamela, age 23, New York University Law School, the death penalty. As a summer intern, I performed various tasks. On the strictly legal end, I conducted research on different points of law, drafted court documents, assisted attorneys at trials and at hearings, and wrote digests of voluminous trial transcripts. On the investigative end, I interviewed clients, witnesses, and family members to uncover facts relevant to the cases being handled by the office. On a more informal basis, I visited prison inmates who had been sentenced to death or life imprisonment. This was perhaps the most rewarding element of my work, meeting those whom I was working to shield from the inexorably bloodthirsty appetite of the criminal justice system, learning about the series of misfortunes that had brought them to prison, and being fortified by their strength of character and their resolve to continue the fight. Kimberly Singer, age 20, Penn State University. My project was an investigation into the sex trafficking and prostitution industry of Yunnan, China. as they are connected to labor migration flows. I spent time in a variety of locations throughout Yunnan, interviewing women, NGO workers, and social workers to learn about the international and domestic sex trafficking of rural Chinese women. In the city of Kunming, I found large-scale industrialized prostitution with little police intervention. In the city of Ruili, which serves as an official border crossing point on the Burma-China border, I found extensive cross-border trafficking occurring, involving both Burmese women trafficked into China and Chinese women trafficked into Burma. In the city of Jingyong and the rural villages of Manglei and Ziding, I found again well-established sex trafficking routes through which Dai, a Chinese ethnic minority group, women are being trafficked into the Thai, Burmese, and Malaysian sex industries. Ana Maria Gomez Lopez, aged 20, University of Pennsylvania. Ana Maria spent 12 weeks assisting the Association of Indigenous Councils of North of Coca and the Regional Indigenous Council of Coca to collect evidence and testimony surrounding the April 2001 massacre of more than 100 people in the Naya River Valley region of Colombia. Both organizations are involved in reconstructing events using information from witnesses and community members. Ana Maria used her knowledge of forensic anthropology to help uncover the physical evidence necessary to press the government to investigate. Her work helped her to gain practical experience gathering forensic evidence, which she hoped would support the subsequent prosecution of human rights violations. Sonia Hetrick, age 15. Her topic was child labor in India. My journey to India with leaders today was an eye-opening, mind-expanding experience. We rode in bicycle rickshaws surrounded by enormous cows, discussed globalization and poverty, and took a boat ride at dawn on the sacred Ganges River. Then we distributed school and health supplies, volunteered at Mother Teresa's orphanage, visited inspiring community development projects in rural Calcutta, and assisted in the construction of a primary school. This trip has only deepened the meaning of my work with Amnesty International and Free the Children, a youth-run organization dedicated to ending child labor. I have contacts with young activists across the US and Canada, and with a few in Germany, India, and Japan. I now have access to graphic images and stories about child laborers to use in my future presentations and articles. Having helped construct a primary school and volunteered in the community around West Bengal and Madras, I feel increasingly linked to the global plight of children. Making friends with children whose lives are so startlingly different from those of Americans, yet whose hopes and dreams mirror many of my own, was powerful beyond comprehension. Aged 15. Excuse me. Just need to pull myself. Oh, that's for me, is it? I thought that was yours. No. Excuse me. Sarah Stillman, age 19, Yale University. Women's rights and the fight against Central American Free Trade Agreement. Without a doubt, the most meaningful aspect of my scholarship was the opportunity to intimately connect with a number of vibrant Guatemalan activists. Though it was a shock to read about the appalling history of US intervention in Guatemala before I visited the country, nothing could be more powerful than hearing it directly from the lips of righteous women like Norma Maldonado. I don't think I could have fathomed the desperation of Guatemala just from studying bitter fruit or the open veins of Latin America. Only after witnessing 1 out of every 15 men in the capital walking around without an arm or a leg could I begin to fathom the real cost of a 36-year-old civil war. Sagal Ali, age 20, Ohio State University. Her topic was female genital mutilation among Somali women in the US. My project was to research the nature and prevalence of female genital mutilation among immigrants in the United States, and my research was based in Columbus, Ohio, which is home to the second largest population of Somalis in America. After completing my research, I soon discovered that thousands of women, most of them refugees from Africa, were suffering from the consequences of female genital mutilation, and they had few places they could receive adequate medical attention. Few physicians knew how to recognize the complications of the practice, and hospitals were overwhelmed with cases. I then founded a non-profit organization in 2005 called the Columbus International Family Health Association. Through this organization, I have been advocating for the healthcare needs of immigrants overall in the state of Ohio. I began an initiative called the Refugee and Immigrant Women's Health Initiative through the organization to work on training physicians to achieve cultural competency and to educate women about their health needs. I also sat on the board of a committee that organized a statewide conference on immigrant refugees' women's health in Ohio. Nabiha Syed, age 19, from Johns Hopkins University. As a Patrick Stewart human rights scholar, Nabiha was able to travel to Pakistan and work under Justice Majida Razvi regarding the Hudud ordinances and women's rights under certain interpretations of Sharia law. After her experience, she returned to her campus and became increasingly involved in Amnesty, becoming a student area coordinator and also a member of the Youth Activist College Planning Committee. Greg Laufer, age 26, Cornell Law School. The International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. Greg interned at the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, working for a prosecution team that was trying the 4 highest-ranking former military officers in the Rwandan army to appear before the tribunal, including Theoneste Bagosora, the alleged mastermind of the genocide. He was recently notified by his team that after several taxing years, final testimony has been given, and the case is now in the closing argument. Alex Beckwith, 24, Columbia University, New York City. In 2005, Alex worked with the HIV/AIDS Advocacy and Human Rights Organization, the Treatment Action Campaign in Cape Town, South Africa. While at TAC, he gained invaluable knowledge of the on-the-ground extent of the HIV/AIDS crisis in southern Africa, as well as the political will and budgetary requirements necessary for governments to adequately address this pandemic and recognize the rights of their citizens. And I guess that's it. Unfortunately, let me just check to make sure that I haven't lost them. Unfortunately, it appears that I had. Oh, no, here they are. This was the one I was looking forward to. Here are 3 people who worked together on a project. Ishmael Kamara, age 16, Lulu Bangura, age 16, and Aida Suzik, age 15. And they're all from Bronx International High School. Our project this summer was doing pair interviews with refugee youth from all over the world living in New York City. Unfortunately, we tried very hard to accomplish our goal of 40 interviews, but we only reached halfway. Most of the kids were from Sierra Leone, Kosovo, and a few from Liberia, Bosnia, Burma. Our duties were to conduct interviews in pairs, transcribe the interviews, and keep a journal of our work. Our project changed a little bit. We were to interview teenagers, but we tried very hard to find refugee teenagers. We were unable to get the number of teenagers we wanted, so we had to include young adults and younger teenagers like 12 and 13-year-olds. Our project was an open and straightforward project. After all the stories we collected, we listened to all the interviews. I finally figured out, this is Ishmael speaking, that many people have gone through the same thing, war and armed conflict, and have the same life experiences. Lulu Bangura said, "This summer's work was a whole new experience. It was like facing life in a whole new way. Our initial goal was to get 40 interviews done at the end of summer. That was too ambitious. I'm pleased and proud of myself and everybody. This feeling is what I believe was supposed to be our goal. We might have done all 40 interviews, but what if we were not satisfied or happy about them? That for sure is no goal or achievement. We worked as a team all summer long. We had fun working together. We enjoyed every moment we spent working, doing interviews and transcribing them. The questions they asked, and this comes from Ida Suzik, how was the life before the war in your country? How was life during the war? Did you move to any other country? How was it there? How is life in New York? What are your bigger concerns in New York City? What are your thoughts about war now? Plans for the future? Is there anything you want to add? How do you feel about our interview? And I just want to read a transcript, a part of one interview. This is with a teenager called, well, he's only identified as A. They asked him, why did you want to kill people? He replied, because I see they kill my friend brother. You know, my close people, and they kill children, and they don't do nothing. They kill them, so I need to kill too. He was asked, you wanted to kill rebels? Yeah, at the time, if I see them like a big man, like a rebel who is strong, I need to kill them. I was forced to, but that man who was helping me tell me to leave that. But I was like, why? You are here, you have gun, you make the war come into Liberia. I said, if you kill the first people, like who is at the top, then what are you gonna do with the low ones? So if you don't kill the top one, then you don't know what to do. But he said, no, I'm not going to kill them because I'm here. And if I kill them, they're going to kill me. I'm here to save myself, to live here. I can't do it. He was asked, how did you leave the camp? Did you run away or did they let you go, the rebels? The rebel camp, you have to sit. They come like it's not, if you are out, you hear the sound, they do everything. No, you're inside. And they don't force children, but if they want to kill you, they're going to take you one by one. Like if they say, tomorrow we're going to kill 4 women, and 3 this, tomorrow they take them. If they don't want you, they're going to leave you, and you walk around and you ask for food. I want to eat. Sometimes they kick you, or sometimes they give it to you. Sometimes you go to sit and relax. But your mother, like the old men, they're at work. If they don't not work, they beat you. And if they don't not work, they shoot you. But if you are young, you are too small, like that too little. They show you like yesterday, we killed that woman, we killed that mother, we're going to kill the children tomorrow. We killed your husband yesterday, we're going to kill you today. We want to see this, and they go and they shoot you. If you are lucky, sometimes if they see you, they skip you, if you are lucky. And sometimes they take people to make hole, and they stand in front of the hole like that, and they bring big machine gun, and they push you to the ground and grind you, cover you up. Age 15. Right. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to someone whose experience of what I've been describing is first-hand and not second-hand like mine. Rob Palme was a Patrick Stewart Scholarship recipient in 2003 when she was a student at Howard University in Washington, D.C. And her project concerned refugee human rights and anti-discrimination. Rob is presently studying for her master's at St. Anthony's College, Oxford. And Rob, if you care to, I'd like you to speak just for a few minutes about your experience. Thank you. Rob Palme.
Thank you, Patrick, for giving me an opportunity to have a platform from which to speak about my experience of being a Patrick Stewart human rights scholar. I am a native of Liberia, and hearing that testimony was incredibly wrenching for me. As most refugees who've experienced the war in Liberia will tell you, it was definitely not a pretty experience. It was wrought with many experiences of death, destruction, and loss of livelihood. So in that vein, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my experiences. Whisked away from Liberia by my parents at the tender age of 6 in 1988, exactly 1 year before Charles Taylor's invasion of the country from neighboring Ivory Coast. I have since grown to maintain a sharp and sober eye focused on the human condition. At the time of my Patrick Stewart Human Rights Fellowship in the summer of 2003, I understood that the most difficult hurdle to cross in conflict transformation was reconciling nations ravaged by war, like my homeland, Liberia. Liberia's exiled population was returning with a surge of enthusiasm and hope for a better life, in 2003, that is. Working with said returnees was a personal ambition of mine, so I planned a 2-month fellowship placement with the Foundation for International Dignity, which is a peace-building, refugee rights, and human rights firm based in the Mano River Union states of Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. What made FIND particularly unique in my eyes was its ability to work with the communities directly and ensure that they develop the capacity to advocate for themselves. I was setting off to launch a multi-pronged public awareness campaign that would have set the groundwork for peaceful integration of internally displaced people, refugees, and returnees within Liberia. Then, lightning struck Liberia for the 3rd time. A few months before I was scheduled to leave for my homeland, the country's World War III ensued, and it's anecdotally called World War III by Liberians. As I sat perched in an international conference center in the mountains of Switzerland during an applied peace studies course, ironically enough, I couldn't help crying inside for the destruction that this particular episode in the country's history had wreaked. The snap, crackle, and pop of mortar shells, rebel mortar shells, terrorized innocent civilians, among them my extended family, in the capital for weeks as U.S. Navy hovered on the Atlantic, waiting for an official declaration to intervene. It would be weeks before the tension subsided and peace was restored with the departure of warlord turned President Charles Taylor on a jumbo jet for asylum in Nigeria. Needless to say, I was unable to travel to Liberia that summer. Instead, I revamped my fellowship plans to help with FIND's capacity building efforts in the United States. Although the glamour of being out in the field had been temporarily shifted to funding searches, I learned head-on that one has to be flexible when doing human rights work, that it doesn't come in perfectly packaged, larger-than-life experiences. Today, Liberia is a changing nation, having elected Africa's first female president and head of state. The country and its war-battered populace are on the road to recovery. But the nation has learned the hard way that the preservation of human rights and peace are the only means forward for sustained development. You see, peace and human rights are fitting bedfellows. They breathe the same air. Without one, the other cannot exist. And so they must coexist in order for the entire universe to evolve and progress. Since completing my fellowship, I've graduated with 2 undergraduate degrees from Howard University in Washington, D.C., as Patrick stated. I took a year off and interned in Egypt for 1 year, immediately afterwards, and then returned to D.C., determined to turn my passion into action, where I served as assistant editor of a small community D.C. newspaper. I was primarily tasked with covering new news out of Africa, the kind of coverage that defied logic in the mainstream papers and portrayed a continent comprised of dignified human beings trying to eke out a living despite repressive regimes, international financial institutions, the AIDS pandemic, and a global system structured in dominance. After my year-long stint at the paper, I decided I needed to reconnect with academia, which in an institution of itself has far-reaching policy implications. Now I'm currently a master's student in the African Studies Department at the University of Oxford, and will be continuing for a DPhil, whose topic will be the exploitation of Liberian plantation workers at the Firestone Rubber Plantation in Harbel, Liberia. As the UK celebrates its 200th anniversary of the abolition of the slave trade, plantation workers in Liberia are working under what appear to be frozen in time, slave-like conditions. When I'm not a full-time student, I serve as a multimedia producer for a Pan-African multimedia firm in Oxford called Fahamu, which attempts to give social movements in Africa a platform from which to operate. Fahamu produces an electronic newsletter, Pambazuka News Weekly, which has a readership within the diaspora and on the continent of Africa approaching 1 million people, which is astronomical in and of itself. My Patrick Stewart Fellowship and the experiences that followed have shown me that activism is an all-encompassing lifestyle, not a pastime. In the words of African-American intellectual and scholar Cornel West, an activist, and I quote, "An activist is someone who is maladjusted to injustice." I find that to be incredibly poignant. I'll say it again. An activist is someone who is maladjusted to injustice. I have grown to become maladjusted to a lot of things in the past 5 or 6 years, to stand strong in my convictions that sustained peace is always attainable, although not always desirable by those who benefit from its absence. Indeed, it appears that in this day and age, when unilateral decision-making, warmongering, and mass killings are the order of the day, we all need to become maladjusted to the absence of peace and the erosion of human rights. Thank you, Patrick, for showing me that one person's dream of facilitating a human rights fieldwork experience for college students can have incredibly far-reaching ripple effects. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob Tell. Being an actor, particularly a stage actor, which is where my career happily is now, is to be part of a creativity which is transient, fleeting, insubstantial. It exists only while the curtain is up and people are looking. When it falls, it's sometimes puzzling to know what was achieved. There's no score, no sculpture, no book, no picture. Although I believe passionately in the power of live theatre to transform, there are times when I feel there is no answer to the question, what good am I doing being a stage actor? What am I giving to the world? Is it a better place because of the work I do? However, it is my work as an actor that has given me the opportunity to create these opportunities for others. And for that, I'm immensely grateful to my profession. We must not lower our standards on human rights. People have the right to be secure, and governments have the responsibility to ensure that security. But it must not be forgotten that reinforcing human rights is the way to reinforce security. Let me conclude by reading a letter from a Chilean journalist who I'm just going to call Luis. He had been tortured by the Pinochet regime, and his wife had disappeared. He was adopted as a prisoner of conscience by Amnesty International. And after he was freed, he wrote this to us. When you are there, naked, on a metal bed, and they are giving you electric shock torture, and your wife is going to die, and the child she is carrying is going to die, and the other person next to you is being killed, you wish there was an international community, a bigger humanity, somebody who will say, this has to stop. This is useless. It corrupts everything. It corrupts life. It should not be possible. Today, there is an international community to say the same. It should not be possible. It should stop. That international community is not big government sitting in Washington or in London. It is the voice and the vision of ordinary men and women who carry the message of human rights forward. Voices like Rob Tell's and those who in some very small way I have been able to assist. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Patrick and Rob Tell, for those inspiring stories of people that have been enabled to go out and change their lives and the lives of others too. We have got some time for questions. Would you both be willing to accept questions? Yeah. Excellent. Thank you very much. Comments, anybody? We also have some roving mics, so I have to say, if you ask a question, a mic will come to you.
Hello, I work in the Civic Hall and I've got a comfortable life in Leeds. I was wondering, Mrs. Stewart, if the scholarships that you give enables these young people to go and visit places and make changes, do you ever feel when you read the reports on them that you want to go out yourself and see what's happened, and having in fact done that yourself and been out to some of the places that the young students have reported on?
Hello. I'm not. This bit not be working, so I'll rely on my own microphone. Oh, now it is. You see, that's why you're a professor and I'm just an actor. You know how to.
But you don't need the microphone. I do.
Yeah, well, no, I'm going to use it anyway. I'm afraid I'm not quite clear what the question was. Do you think you could form it as one sentence with a question mark at the end of it?
Have you visited any of the places that the students who take up your scholarships have been to?
Well, I've travelled as an actor. I've travelled a great deal, and I've been lucky enough to work in a number of interesting countries. I've worked particularly in Mexico 3 or 4 times. I worked 2 years ago in Thailand. I worked quite a lot in Canada, and of course all over the United States. But no, I have not ever had the opportunity to follow up to any specific locations or sites that the students have visited. I would like to say, because that question sort of prompts this, that 3-4 years ago, I relocated from the United States. I'm now fully resident in the UK, and very, very happy to be so. Although proud and delighted and dazzled by my memory of 18 years living in California. I am now in the process of converting the Patrick Stewart Scholarship from the United States to the UK. Unfortunately, I cannot afford to fund 2 scholarships in 2 different countries, and as I'm no longer resident in the United States, and Bill Schultz, the man who was the inspiration for this, has now retired as General Secretary, it seemed an appropriate time. So now with Amnesty International headquarters in London, and particularly with Irene Khan, we are talking about how such a scholarship can be set up here in the UK. So those of you who are students and who plan to be students, I hope for a long time to come, watch this space.
Well, here's a plug for the university. I hope very much we can get involved in some of those projects, because we'd be extremely interested in that, I think. There's a question here, I think.
Hi, sorry, I'd like to ask all 3 of you, what personally do you feel is the most pressing issue in human rights today?
I think all of the issues to do with 9/11 and the warping and distorting of international law that has occurred during that is very, very pressing indeed. I have been very active in the past 12 months with Amnesty International UK on their new campaign to stop violence against women. The reason that I have been so active with this is that as a child, I was unlucky enough to witness on a recurring and regular basis violence against my mother, and it was something that, despite all the help that one can subsequently get, has marked me for life, as indeed it marked my mother. So I have a particular, perhaps it's the only direct personal association that I have with any one of the amnesty campaigns, but it is a particular campaign that I'm very proud to have been part of. And the impact of it worldwide has already been absolutely extraordinary. Because we're not only talking about domestic violence, but institutional violence, violence in prisons, violence within the military. The areas which this particular campaign has touched are many, and there were people at the very beginning who thought, well, this is not what Amnesty International was created to do. These are not prisoners of conscience. They are people whose human rights are being flouted, and as such, it seems to me entirely appropriate that Amnesty should campaign in this way. Do you want to? Yes.
Well, I think elaborating on what Patrick just mentioned, I mean, my presentation is about the erosion of human rights during the absence of peace. And I think war would definitely be one of the most pressing human rights issues of the day. My concern, primarily because of what I've studied and where I'm from, is the continent of Africa. And I think during processes of the absence of peace, human rights are null and void, and they're no longer the standard of the day, which makes it a very, very dangerous particular point in a society's history. We've seen it happen in Zimbabwe, we've seen it happen in Liberia, in Sierra Leone, in Sudan. I mean, it's something that has ripple effects. So I think if we were to focus on one particular issue, it would be the absence of peace, war, and the erosion of human rights during times of war.
I'd really like to thank you for making that statement so clear, because, Patrick, you're back here in your birthplace, and within 20 miles of this hall where we're sitting, we have Menwith Hill, which is the largest American spy base in the Northern Hemisphere. You have the matched one in Pine Gap. And the preparations that are going on there now, and at Fylingdales, for America to sort of gain supremacy, literally, of the entire world's resources, are happening in our country right now. And all of our civil liberties and human rights are being impeded because of this base. And the fact that right back in the beginning, when we drew up the agreements to have American bases in this country, we were bankrupt and we had no power to get the control over their actions that we need to safeguard the British people and our human rights and civil liberties. And what I would urge you to do, because you are so associated with the Star War programme, I would really, really value both of your help in trying to bring a bigger focus to how immoral this whole programme is. The Americans took back the top Nazi scientists at the end of the Second World War, put them in charge of their space and military programmes, and it's really no surprise that today they're talking about space domination. The Nazis never were beaten. They were protected and nourished and brought into their own in America, and we're suffering globally from that. And the amount of money that is going to go into all of these projects will make everybody's human rights programs disappear out of to fund them. So I hope while you're here, you can take that particular issue to heart, and I'm sure your colleague there who's put it so eloquently already knows that. And thank you both very much.
Well, that's a very powerful statement. Thank you so much for making it. I actually drive past Mammoth Hill every time I go home, and the lights of the camp at night spoil my view of the stars. So I already have one ongoing complaint with that establishment. Did you want to say anything? Thank you.
Just to wait for the mic, sorry.
Thank you. I'm very interested in knowing your opinions on how Amnesty International can attract more young people. In England, we've just reduced our membership age to 14, and we're very, very interested in getting young people involved in Amnesty. So both yourself and Rotel, opinions on how we get young members in. We need them.
Well, I think what's so fascinating about Amnesty is they tackle every issue under the sun. And so I think what you'd probably have to start with is a multi-pronged sort of survey on what are the issues that are important to young people today, and then come back with the results from Amnesty to say, okay, we tackle abortion rights issues. If that's important to you, then join the Amnesty bandwagon. I think those things in and of themselves will get people involved and sort of galvanized. But Amnesty, I mean, anything you can possibly think about is on the agenda for Amnesty. And so find out what young people in your schools and your universities are passionate about, because I can guarantee you they're just as interested in the increase in militarization as they are in the efforts to end the war in Iraq, as they are interested in abortion rights or other human rights concerns. We're not as apathetic as the media would like to portray us, and I think if you speak to people here, you'd be able to get a sense of what they're interested in. So I think that's where you have to start.
And there are such things as children's rights. And I have a suspicion that a lot of children are probably not even aware that, that these rights exist. I have seen in the United States the success of groups within high schools to be very, very effective. And I know we have some children here, forgive me, we have some young people here today with their teachers. And I think as it was for me as an actor, it took one English teacher who believed in me and who loved Shakespeare to set me on the path of a career. It need only take one teacher with an active, alert interest in human rights. I would imagine to galvanize whole numbers of young people within any particular institution. I think it's at the high school level that these things can be achieved. It gives me enormous satisfaction whenever we find a high school student who applies and can be awarded a scholarship. As you heard from the account of the young woman who was in India, the extraordinary maturity that comes about through such an experience is absolutely invaluable. And so I would stressing that it is a non-political organization, not attached to any particular party or government, and a campaign within the schools.
I wonder how you think Amnesty should relate to other organizations which to some extent have issues that overlap. I mean, as an Amnesty member, I've written as individual on behalf of other individuals, but you've been stressing quite rightly how poverty is a human rights issue. You've been talking about abortion. The list is endless where there's a human rights issue. But when I've been campaigning, say, for debt cancellation or trade debt, which you could say also has got human rights implications, Amnesty's not been mentioned in that, rightly or wrongly, as far as I know, when it obviously has got a related interest. So this is really a topic for a whole seminar. But I wondered if you had any preliminary thoughts about how Amnesty relates to climate change, the long list, and of C&D, obviously, because Menwith Hill's been mentioned and so on.
Everything that you have mentioned is now beginning to bubble to the surface so far as official policy within Amnesty International is concerned. They are widening and widening and widening their area of concerns, and poverty being the next main program that is going to be following the Violence Against Women campaign, that is going to be at the top of their agenda. trade and economics is also absolutely critical to the basic human rights of individuals, and that's something which has never been part of their active work before, but is certainly going to be. Everything that you have mentioned is now being discussed within the Councils and Committee of Amnesty.
I'm sort of an organization file, I guess you could say. I did some work with Oxfam America while I was in the States as well, and they have something called the Change Initiative, where they try to get university students involved in issues of debt cancellation or economic, social, and cultural rights. And during one of the plenary sessions, I did ask the Oxfam leader whether or not Amnesty and Oxfam had had any sort of relationship, and he said that indeed, on the platform of economic, social, and cultural rights, they were trying to collaborate a little bit more. So I don't know where it is. That was about 3 years ago when I asked this question. I don't know where it is in this day and age, but I think working with organizations like Oxfam, working with organizations like Save the Child, working with organizations that deal with economic, social, and political rights, sort of from a holistic approach, is what's going to move the agenda forward, activism as we know it. So hopefully that'll happen a lot more than it has been in the past.
I know also that there has recently been a significant overlap between Amnesty International and Doctors Without Borders and the work that they do, because health, an individual's right to a healthy life, is fundamental, and it's not something that's been addressed in the past, but is continually discussed now.
There's a question here. Yeah. Oh, can't hear you. Sorry. Still can't hear you.
It's not turned on. Oh. Can we find another one?
There's another one.
As we know, there's a lot of misuse to human rights around the world. Do you think there will be an end to it, and how?
There's two lines in Shakespeare that I've always loved, and they are actually to do with a romantic encounter, but taken out of that context, they can apply to anything. A character asks another character, "But may I live in hope?" And the other character replies, "All men, I hope, live so." And that's exactly where I stand in relation to the question that you've asked. We fight because we know we must win, because there is no alternative. The struggle is everything, and goals are continually being reached. And whether it's on an individual human basis or on larger issues such as the campaign to stop violence against women, I'm lucky enough through my association with Amnesty to see many letters like the one that I read out from the Chilean journalist Luis. And when you hear single individual accounts like that, it makes the struggle seem terrifically worthwhile.
Thank you for asking that question. There is a South African humanistic philosophy called Ubuntu, and what it means literally is, it is through the other that I gain infinite worth. And I find that to be incredibly, incredibly powerful, in the sense that we all are human beings and we don't exist in a vacuum. It is through you, the other, that I gain infinite worth. And I think if we start thinking about each other as that important, the erosion of human rights won't have such lasting effects. And I think you can't have enough hope. I think with your activism, with my activism, with all of us in this room, we all have a part to play in making and creating a world that we envision to be better for the next generation and the generation beyond. So it is through you that I gain infinite worth. And I think if you pass that message along, our value in humanity, in our own as well as others, will completely shift and change.
As an actor, there's one thing that I spend my days, my life doing, and that is putting myself into someone else's shoes. Sometimes they're not always pleasant shoes. In exactly 1 week's time, I, for the first time in my career, begin rehearsing the role of Macbeth, who, as I read the play, would seem to me to be perhaps the wickedest individual in the whole of Shakespeare. But I have to put myself inside that man's cruel and dangerous head and try to find out what it feels like. But it's always seemed to me that on a human level, on a day-to-day level, as well as an international level, if only we could, if only for a few minutes, just simply take that step out of our shoes and into the other person's and see the world just for a moment with their eyes, no matter how contrary to our world it seems, or how opposite. We were speaking before we began. Who would ever have thought that Gerry Adams and Ian Paisley might sit? Well, Paisley said to us, never, never, he said, again and again and again. And there he is now, doing it. And one of the ways in which they're doing it is that they have come to a point where they have to see their situation from someone else's point of view. And I often feel that if only that one simple step could be taken in the world, so much might be achieved.
Thank you very much. I'm getting a kind of wind-up signal here. I just want to say thank you. That's a wonderful kind of ending to, I think, to a really inspirational speech. And from both of you, thank you very much indeed. I did have the pleasure of seeing Patrick in The Tempest just a few days ago, in fact, and it was an extremely powerful performance and very passionate. And now I can see that there's power and passion not just in the actor, but also in the man. And I think we all have a lot to be grateful for that. So thank you very much indeed for both of you coming and giving us an insight into your inspiration. I'd also like to thank everybody here for coming along, and also the people who organised the event, and in particular Sean Morris from Peace and Emergency Planning here at Leeds City Council, who's done an awful lot to get this together and get everybody here and everything working, and it all seems to have worked really well indeed. I'd also like to thank Mike McGowan, who's an ex-councillor from Leeds City Council. He's the man who set up these Olaf Palme Memorial Lectures, and I think they've all been extremely good, very worthwhile, and I hope they continue for some time into the future. So thanks to everyone, and if I don't see you before, then see you next year, perhaps. Thank you.